basically a relaunch of our valid questions format, which is really a sort of interview and expert-based programming to give you, a view on current topics and things that are evolving in the certification industry and the things that are relevant to it. You are listening to experts from Certiverse today. So just to tell you a little bit about us, we are an end-to-end exam development and delivery platform. All sorts of benefits to that, but this is not a sales call. We will be happy to talk to you more if you'd like to learn about the platform afterwards. You can reach us at answers@certiverse.com. So you may notice I am not one of these three people. I am Andrea Brown. I am the Director of Content and Events here at Certiverse. Our alphabetical lead here, Abby, is unfortunately not able to join us vocally for our session today due to illness, but you can see her here to the side, and she'll be able to help answer questions and be involved in chat as well. Speaking of, if you do have questions as we go along, feel free to put those in the Q&A or the chat session section of Zoom. You can choose how much you would like to be mentioned. You can make it anonymous. You can post just to the hosts, however you choose to do that. And we will either go through questions as they're relevant as we go through, but we will also save time at the end. So you can kind of get your thoughts together and add to that. So Abby is here and we'll be adding her sales and market strategy expertise as much as possible, but I will be relaying that on her behalf. And then I will have Reese and Ruben introduce themselves as well.
Sure. Hi,
Thank you.
everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm Reese. I'm the AI psychometrician, and I work mostly in research and development of AI features to make the exam development process more efficient.
And I'm Ruben Garcia. I'm CEO and co-founder of Certiverse. And I will say I'm also a little bit sick. I'm just getting over a cold, and I think Abby just started her cold. But I will apologize if I have to mute really quickly during a cough or turn my camera off for a minute or a second or whatever. But thank you, Andrew.
So Ruben, if you can kind of kick things off and moderate us through our questions.
Yeah, so I think the first question that we'd like to kind of answer is around why certify in 2026, right? What's the point of certification in general, but really 2026, what's special about that? So Andrew, do you want to take on, maybe we can show the next slide and we'll let you answer Abby's slide since Abby's can't talk.
I will be happy to do that. And this, it's great to share this. This research does come from, company-wide effort in particular to be, looking at the market and seeing how things are changing. We do have, we can show you our work if you would like the resources for this information. But really the key to certification in 2026 is, reskilling being kind of the key word. We're seeing the workforce change so much and jobs compress and change and recategorize. And so the way to manage that for a lot of employers is to think about reskilling. And so that's where certification can come in and really prove the skills that might not have yet had a chance to be implemented in the day-to-day work of someone's job.
Yeah.
So, nope, go ahead, Ruben.
Yeah, thank you. I also just want to kind of add one thing. I mean, this is from like a real life situation, the real life job that has changed. But I don't know if you noticed when Reese introduced himself, he didn't introduce himself as a psychometrician. He introduced himself as an AI psychometrician. And last year, I know we were the very first company out there to post a job search for an AI psychometrician. I mean, there is no other job searches for AI psychometricians. And I think that just goes to show like how quickly jobs are changing and how skills are changing. And we had a lot of applicants, a lot of great individuals who knew both AI and psychometrics. And we were very interested in having somebody who can, with two of those skills combined. The other thing I want to add is that I was just going over our financials with our finance team a couple of hours ago, and they were showing us all of our growth from 2025 going into 2026. And towards the last quarter of 2025, the majority of our growth came from clients where they've launched brand new certifications for jobs that did not exist in 2024. I mean, these are all AI fill in the blank role. So it's really interesting how quickly the skill gap or skills are changing, and the requirements for new skills are changing very rapidly, and also a demand for those skills are changing, obviously.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, we can see some of those specific data points in AI really pushing not only the workforce forward, but also the gaps that are being seen and being able to prove those skills going forward. And again, the compliance pressure is also a factor. Like it is not just a nice to have a certified workforce. It also is a legal and compliance element as well. And then really seeing how the SaaS ecosystem is changing. There's a constant influx of new players in that market, but also seeing how certification can directly impact product adoption and retention. That when you have a dedicated certified community, you also see the growth of the product as well. All right. So if you have specific questions to that, I can also take a look at that, and I think we can get that information to you as well as we go along. All right. Moving forward. So
All right,
we made a big promise
sorry,
here.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ruben.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say we just having such a limited time frame mentioned in the title of the webinar was very deliberate. Some people might think that's a long time. Like, why can't I just do this all, more quickly in other ways? But when we're actually talking about a valid certification, what people are more used to seeing is a 6 to 9 to 12-month time frame. So how is it in any way possible that can be compressed into 3 days? And what are you going to lose or gain from that? So we did want to move this then on to Reese to explain how that's even possible.
Sure, thanks. My goal is to walk through some of the AI features that we've been working on since I came to Certiverse in June from a company that makes tests in 6, 12, months. So I was really excited to take on this role. So in general, the AI features we work on are oriented towards the most time-consuming aspects of the test development process. And most of those time-consuming aspects involve a lot of manual and repetitive human labor. And the reason we target that kind of labor is because repetitive labor is fatiguing, and fatigue introduces errors, human error into the process. And that's also why it can take 6 or 12 months to make an exam. And you're often relying on volunteer time, like volunteer subject matter experts. So in general, the test development process asks a lot of them. So we've designed these features to carry the user throughout the entire exam development process, from the first step, which is exam design, or developing your test blueprint. It tells you what content is relevant for the exam, what content's relevant for the role. Usually we do a job task analysis where we talk to experts about what the demands of the job really are. And then once you have an idea of the content that needs to be targeted on the exam, you need to write items or test questions that are aligned with that content and test those knowledge and skills. We currently have an authoring platform that allows manual item authoring. We have AI item authoring that you can feed in your knowledge base and then use that as a basis for writing test items or having AI write test items. We're currently working on batch item generation, where you can create an abundance of items that can accommodate multiple forms and things like that. You can generate hundreds of items in a matter of minutes. And then we also are developing a feature that allows you to import your items that have been made on some other platform, and it automatically formats them in a way that Certiverse can accommodate. So once you have your test items developed, you often need to identify what are called item enemies. These are questions that cannot appear on the same form of the test. either because they are redundant and ask the same thing, or because one question gives away an answer to a different question. So we call those item enemies, and you need to make sure you identify them so they don't end up on the same form because they can cause validity issues with the exam. And then once you have your item bank of items and all the enemies are identified, so you know what can go on a form, you need to do a review of all those items to make sure that the content is actually useful for its intended purposes and that the items are written to a specific standard so that there's nothing interfering with the examinees responding to the questions. You don't want non-knowledge um, factors influencing responding on the exam. And then we've been developing a couple different types of AI review to help speed up that process because that can be extremely labor intensive and iterative. And then once you have your reviewed item bank, you need to decide where to set a cut score on the exam. So we call that a standard setting meeting. And it involves a group of experts coming together and evaluating the items and deciding where a useful cut score would be that discriminates a skilled from a less skilled examinee. And then the final process, once you have a cut score, is to assemble your test form or forms if you're using multiple forms. And that can also be a really taxing manual process that we're trying to use AI to expedite. So now I can walk through each of these features that we've been working on in a little more detail.
Hey, Andrea, sorry, can you go back to that other slide? I just want to talk about, and just, I think in general, Reese, this is really, thank you for going over that. But I also feel like if you look at every step here, it's either a very highly costly step because, there's no way I'm going to be doing exam form assembly. That's something that I would hand off to you to work on, right? Go build us some equated forms and so forth. And almost every step here, from my perspective, I just see a lot of cost, a lot of fees, a lot of professional services fees. Standard setting is an example. I watch exam developers do standard setting. I know Alan does a lot of standard settings, and I know a lot of our customers use our platform. They use a standard setting module, but you really have to be an expert. I personally would never be able to do it. And I think as you look at across this, all of these items here, exam design, another really good example. That's a job task analysis. That's a survey. It's a blueprint. It's a very costly process that can mostly be done by exam experts or PhD psychometricians. And I think that part of what excites me about all of this process and from an automation is just the pure fact that we're eliminating a lot of costs, a lot of professional fees costs that I think would normally apply, through these processes. The other thing is obviously it's all the human interaction. Like I think if you've ever reviewed enemy items, gone through an item bank as just a human, you're like, somebody says, hey, we did a remote proctoring certification for our proctors and went through this process. It is like the most painful process ever for a subject matter expert to help identify enemy item detection. So anyway, I'm very interested in what you have to present around some of this stuff.
And I think I'll add, the goal in reducing repetitive human labor is then to use the expensive human time, the expert time, for more higher level thinking and more higher level decision making to guide exam development. There's no reason for that time to go towards repetitive labor. So I think one of the more impactful features we're working on is batch item generation, which is a way that users can generate hundreds of items that are aligned to their test blueprint. So one of the biggest challenges to using AI in general, especially when you're asking it to generate highly specific targeted content, is hallucinations, where the LLM will output content that sounds very convincing and it sounds correct, but is actually incorrect. So we have a couple safeguards that we've baked into the feature to prevent hallucinations, and it allows the user to use RAG, or retrieval augmented generation, which is where you can feed the model a knowledge base, your course, your training materials, whatever you have access to. You can feed that to the model, and the model ingests the information and uses that as a basis for generating questions. And it will also for each question, provide a reference for where it got that information in your knowledge base. So you can verify it manually if you want to. And you have evidence for that question being content valid. And then we also use something called consensus grounding, which is, you have a model that gives you the question and generated the question based on relevant content you gave it. And then we have another model that takes the question and tries to answer it. And if the answers don't match, then that question's invalid, it's thrown out, and then another question is regenerated. And the goal is that it will iterate over this process until you arrive at a full bank of content valid, consensus grounded questions that are aligned to your specific blueprint. We also have built into this feature a large item buffer. So let's say, you have a blueprint and one of your topics needs 12 questions. The model will generate far more than 12 questions. That way you will never run into problems with, assigning those items to forms. And then I think the next feature is also kind of baked into this, but it will also be a standalone feature. So I think we can.
Can I ask? Sorry, Reese,
sure,
can I
sure.
ask?
Sorry, Ruben.
Thank you. I know you're excited about going to talk about the next feature, but I think I think what's also interesting about this model here, specifically is it's just the amount of time I've seen this. When we first implement this, we implemented it. One of our R&D developers said, we're gonna have it create a bunch of items that are related to coding standards, and I don't remember exactly, but there was what the certification was that we're trying to write for, but they uploaded 1,000-page like training manual for coding, and this is an open source project that was out there. We uploaded that, and it's impressive how quickly the AI went through and categorized that and made it available for item writing. I think it was like a couple of minutes. And I was even more impressed that the what it cost us for it to process that. It was like under $2, which is incredible. Like if you think about the cost of having 10 subject matter experts who have the knowledge of that document, it's 100 times, 1,000 times more, right? To try to gather those people together. So the cost and the time is extremely impressive, and and just how accurate it is. I mean, I think that the team took that document and then seeded changes to the document and tried to get it to write questions based on those changes, and it was really impressive that it picked up those changes. So I'm excited about this mostly for like the fact that you can offer something that's very, very impressive, but at a very low cost. I mean, we include this in the platform just because, why? I don't even know how we would charge our customer $2 for uploading a document.
I also
should
wanted
also add. Oh, sorry, Andrea, go ahead.
That's okay. I just wanted to jump in because we had a couple questions I think that are pertinent to this specific piece. So I just wanted to mention before we moved on. One being, specifically, how do you how I think we covered a little bit about how Certiverse is managing the system, and there was a question about the ability of other clients to view or access what's uploaded from other clients, and just maybe talking a little bit about the security and the isolation of that information.
Yeah, I mean, I think I believe the models are secure and they're isolated per client, and whatever you upload is really specific to you. And then we use an enterprise model as well, so that it makes it harder for us, believe it or not, because we can't save our prompts or anything like that. We can't reuse any of the knowledge, so we have to whenever we build any of this, we have to always kind of start from the beginning and build on that, and then we have to save that. There's no context, basically. I don't know if Reese, if you can explain some of that, but sure. It's costly from a development perspective to build it. It takes more to engineer it, but it does makes saving the content more secure as well.
Yeah, so if you've ever used ChatGPT, it can remember previous queries or previous content you've given it because it stores it. Our models, we're using a more secure hosted model that does not do that. So it's not as if content you feed the models in Certiverse is ending up, being fed into OpenAI. So that does make it harder for us because it can't recall content it's been given earlier. It's a clean instance every time you instantiate the model. I also want to add about this batch item generation is that typically your item writers are first and foremost subject matter experts, like with high domain knowledge. They're not experts in test development, meaning like they don't have extensive training in item writing. They usually are given some training, but we've specified the prompt with a lot of item writing best practices to hopefully prevent a lot of the common issues we see with item writing quality when those items are produced by subject matter experts.
Great. And then we also had a question about how the AI is able to generate incorrect but plausible distractors that are useful discriminators between qualified and non-qualified candidates.
That is a challenge because if it's incorrect but plausible, there's a high likelihood for hallucination. And I think that's why RAG is a really good use case here, is because it will take content from your knowledge base and add a slight change that makes that incorrect knowledge. And if it, is relevant to the stem and the key, but it's incorrect, it does make that distractor a really good discriminator for between skilled and less skilled examinees. But distractors, it's hard for humans to come up with distractors, and if it's hard for humans, oftentimes a model will struggle in the same way. Oftentimes it just models the same struggles humans have. And creating distractors is always a challenge.
All right. Next. Speaking of.
Yes. So once you have your items, you need to find the items that cannot go on the same form. These are item enemies. And I think I've mentioned, maybe I haven't mentioned at this point, there are really two types of item enemies. One is just the items are redundant. So it asks about the same content using different words, and it looks bad when you have items that are asking you about the same thing twice on an exam. It's like a face validity problem, and it undermines the credibility of the exam. Psychometrically, the worst type is giveaway enemies, where one item gives away the answer to a subsequent item. So I have an example here. Like if I asked you, Paris is the blank largest capital city in Europe, right? That makes it apparent that Paris is a capital city. And if I later asked you which city is the capital of France, you would be more apt to say Paris because you already have that you've already been cued with that information. And we use something called cosine similarity to detect these. So it measures the semantic similarity, or the similarity in the meaning of the language. So we look at the similarity between every possible pair of stems, every possible pair of questions, and then we also look at the similarity between the stem of one question and the key of a different question to find instances when the stem gives away the key to a different question. And overall, we found that in our testing that this method can identify 100% of redundant enemies and 97% of the giveaway enemies. So it's pretty successful, and this would take SMEs a long, long time to do, and it's really taxing on your working memory because you have to remember back a few items as you're trying to find enemies. It's really a pretty terrible task.
Hey, Reese, I have a question about this. I think this and the last process, just time-wise, like what would it take an LLM to identify enemy items?
If you have a corpus of a few hundred items, or you have an item bank and you want to find all those enemies, it's really quick for the model to transform the language into embeddings. It takes a matter of seconds. So finding the enemies would take, I would say, less than 1 minute.
Okay. We're still under 3 days. So all right, we're good.
Yeah.
All right, and we did have a question that I think will now be answered and revealed as we go forward. As far as, are you proposing that humans are not involved in item review? And I think we'll get a little more detail as you go forward there.
Right. Yes, that's a good question. I think the gold standard will always be that you should have human oversight into the final version of the items. But there's no reason that LLMs can't assist humans in reviewing items for content and writing quality. So we've developed an automated item review that looks at both the quality of the item writing, so there are obvious flaws in how the item's written, and then also the content of the item. Is the item content valid for its intended purpose. And we, at this point, intend it to stand in as an initial SME review. So it's sort of the first pass review that each item will get, and then it can later be refined by human judgment. But in Certiverse, we have a series of systematic review questions, and we've tried to make that interface and that process simple, but it's still labor intensive to go through and answer all those questions for every item. And it turns out that large language models are pretty good at answering those questions as a first pass. So we intend this to happen automatically when a user submits new items. So this first pass AI review will just automatically be triggered upon submission of new items. And then the users, the SMEs, the item authors, can review the large language model's responses to these systematic review questions and see why the model, an explanation for why the model chose the answer it did in case it wants more rationale. And then once you have the LLM's feedback on the item, the user can manually revise the item, you can use AI to revise the item, or you can just regenerate an item if you decide you don't like it at all. So we tried to sort of embed the task with like a certain degree of flexibility and user specification.
Hey, Reese, on that note, if you're creating, let's say, if you have the LLM and you're generating, let's say, like 500 items, right? Because you have this item, you have one LLM generating the items. How can you like check the quality of those items? Are you using the same LLM, and is it a different model that's checking the quality? Because as an item author, I can use AI, put in the topic, it generates an item, I submit it, and now what I've created is now going to be reviewed by an LLM, right?
Yes. So between creation and review, we could use the same model, but a different call of that same model. Because remember, the context is sort of wiped every time. It's as if it never saw the item. So it's sort of a clean, independent review. I think, a good approach is like an ensemble approach where you're using multiple models to review, and then you can see, how the reviews overlap and then the things that are distinct from each model, because each model's trained on like similar but slightly non-overlapping training data sets. So I'm a fan of an ensemble approach. That said, it adds complexity and it adds runtime to the process. And I think the heavy lifting would be fine with the same model, just run in a different instance. So we have two layers of the automated item review. The first is looking at item quality. So, subject matter experts pretty reliably make some common errors during item writing. For example, they write a key or a correct answer that sticks out somehow, either because it's way longer or more detailed than the distractors, or they might write a stem or a question that's double-barreled, meaning it doesn't cleanly ask about one thing, it's actually asking two things. These are all like errors that item writers tend to make over and over again. And the goal of this layer of automated review is to give item authors feedback, so to prevent those kind of errors from happening, and then give them the option to automatically revise the items when those problems do arise. So it's sort of like an informal item coaching and a way to automatically revise items in real time as you're creating them. And then the second layer is content review. So, I've mentioned those systematic review questions. They ask things like, is the item actually on topic? Is it aligned with the blueprint topic? Like really critical questions. Is the correct answer the only correct answer? Or could you argue that one of the distractors is correct and the item has two keys? Like this is critical for making sure that the exam is psychometrically sound. And we found that LLMs can answer these questions with about 90% accuracy. So it's not perfect, which is why you still need a human in the loop making the final call, but it gets you, it does a lot of the heavy lifting for you. And then on this table on the right, this is about the common item writing flaws I talked about. So like you have a distractor that is obviously incorrect. So it's like functionally not working as a distractor. That's really common. And then I have, the number of those types of mistakes that our SMEs found, and then the number of those that the LLM found. So it's really the hit rate. And overall, it's really high. So, it's finding 93% of those implausible distractors. That eliminates a lot of SME review. So I was pretty impressed by it.
I think the other thing about this is what I know this is still in development. It's going to go into the platform soon, but I think what I love about this is the fact that we're providing this information to the SME in real time before they submit their item for actual review, right? So it's like, I mean, like just the time saving in that, and you're not having a SME submit an item and then wait for another SME to look at it, review it, and reply back and say, "Hey, you have two correct answers here," or whatever that is, But I think like just the time savings from that perspective is pretty amazing and incredible. Because and then I think at the when once you do include a second human SME, their job is going to be a lot easier, right? Because they're not going to get all the double keys, all the psychometrically, I guess, invalid, wording of the stem and things like that. So I think, I mean, that's exciting in itself. Is that just the amount of work that we're going to remove from the reviewer as well?
In general, we also take a stance of like, an ounce of prevention.
Hmm.
The nightmare scenarios when you end up with an item that's double keyed on a live exam and then you have to rescore, or you end up with item enemies on an exam and it affects the validity of the responses. So by using these AI tools, it's actually quite preventative. It really helps minimize the human error that can lead to those nightmare scenarios.
Fantastic.
I think we have one more feature. Yes. So standard setting is, usually a big SME meeting where you item by item, you give every item what's called an ANG-off rating, which is how likely is a minimally qualified candidate or a candidate who is theoretically right at that cut score, how likely is that candidate to answer the item correctly? So you get a probability. And then for all of the items on the exam, you sum them, you sum those ANG-off scores, and it essentially is it's your cut score. And we've tested to see how useful a large language model can be in estimating those ANG-off ratings for every item. And we found that it correlates with sort of real data. So like a good test for how useful the ANG-off scores are is how highly they relate to real item difficulty. So you have your examinees take the exam and you can estimate how difficult the item is. And we found that the ANG-off ratings from the large language models match those item difficulty values just as strongly as ANG-off ratings from subject matter experts. So I think that's pretty compelling initial evidence that LLMs can, in fact, evaluate item difficulty pretty reliably. And
Again, Reese, can you kind of maybe compare that to the manual process of the time and the traditional method of
yes. So the manual process is item by item. You have the SMEs estimate the ANG-off score, so the portion of the time that a MQC would get that incorrect. And it involves a lot of iterative discussions. And there's like a phenomenon where as these really fatiguing workshops go on, SMEs tend to become overly agreeable because they want to move on with the task. So I think the quality of the ANG-off ratings can start to go down over time. And then, there's kind of a wrap-up discussion where if you have these items pilot tested and you have initial item difficulty data, you show them how those items are performing, and then you kind of recalibrate and adjust your ANG-off ratings from there. So it's often like, a multi-day workshop.
Yeah, and I think the other part of it is that it's mostly, like we have a tool in the platform that allows you to build a standard setting exam, and you can build a form, presents the items to the candidates where to the SMEs where they're answering the ANG-off questions, right? But even with that technology, it's still typically, I would say, like I would never be able to administer standard setting, but I know like a lot of our power users do standard settings, and they're not PhD psychometricians, but I know that a lot of to get through the process, and we do this for clients, is you kind of have to be a psychometrician to do this. And And I think I mean, I'm more excited about this than anything that, I know you've built all this technology is really great, but I love this because I feel like once we build the AI standard setting and allow customers to use that to set the cut score versus just setting an arbitrary cut score, because most programs they look at the process of what it's going to take and the time it's going to take, and then the fact that you have to gather your SMEs and pick a date in the future to be on a call for 2 hours. And like in our platform, you can do it asynchronous, where you can start part of the process and then allow the SMEs to continue the rest of it. But even that facilitation is really difficult. And I can tell you that like a good chunk of our clients don't do standard settings, and they just kind of just say, okay, we're just going to set the cut score at 70, or we're going to set it at 80 or whatever it is, right? Without doing this, mostly because of the cost and the time involved in this and the facilitation. So this is one of the things that really excites me, because we're going to bring this very expensive, highly facilitated psychometric service to to the world, where they can just press a button and hopefully they're going to get a very reliable cut score.
We had
So
two
I think
questions
I
kind of
saw, yeah, I think I
related to
saw a
this.
question in the chat. So why don't you go ahead and ask so everyone.
Yeah, because they kind of go together, because one is an MQC profile required for the AI standard setting, and the other is what information is the LLM using to evaluate the MQC, which also seems like a good opportunity to talk about how AI can help you determine what the MQC is.
And
Yes.
can you explain the MQC? Because I think I know we have a lot of users in the chat that are new to testing as well.
Yes. So the MQC stands for minimally qualified candidate, and it's a description of what someone who is theoretically right at the cut score, so someone who is minimally qualified, what they're expected to know in order to do the job successfully at a minimally competent level. And to answer the first question of is it required, it is required. In fact, the better specified the MQC description is, the more likely the Ingoff ratings are going to match reality. The MQC is the basis for the LLM's judgments about the test questions Ingoff ratings.
Yeah.
I think that might answer the second question, but does that?
And
Can you repeat the second
and
question?
just to add to that, Reese, I think that like the it's kind of interesting because the minimum qualified candidate is something that you have to really define at the beginning of the process, so you can design the exam. Obviously, this step depends on it, and one of the things that we did in Certiverse is we built that into the platform so that you can actually use AI to help you define the minimum qualified candidate as well, which is a little bit crazy because you have AI. I mean, you're verifying, you're validating, you can add to it and remove to it, but it is important. It is important step in the chain. So you can, it'll help you with item writing. It'll help you with blueprint design, standard setting, and then subsequent processes.
And that AI generated MQC descriptions based on a description of the role or like a job description, right? So the better specified that is, then the better specified your AI MQC description would be, and then in turn, the higher quality your AI hangoff standard setting would be.
Fantastic. All right, so we are getting close to time, and we have a couple other things we want to cover. So if you do have questions, again, feel free to put those in either the chat or the Q&A, and we'll get to those as we go, and we'll leave a few minutes at the end, and if anyone needs a little extra time, we can accommodate that as well. This was a question, again, kind of designed for Abby, but I will go over a little bit of our thoughts on the purpose and the ways that AI can help grow a certification program. As you're seeing, one of the big things is the speed element, and both the speed and the cost savings is going to give opportunities that just really previously hadn't existed. A lot of programs have been stunted by just the cost and the time required to do things. Sometimes the more niche roles or emerging technologies, where there might not be as large a community, might get put on hold or set to the side. But now with the ability to do things so much more quickly, and as long as basically if you have the training materials, if you have the ability to define the role, it's a lot easier and more cost effective to move forward with that. We also have seen that over 60% of SaaS and technology companies are operating partner programs and customer academies. So, getting partner-specific certification programs really help you to scale and make sure that there's consistency and quality throughout those partnerships. And with technology in particular, just with the speed and the pace of platforms and systems changing, it really gives you that ability to make sure you're staying current and relevant to the community using it.
And Andrew, I just want to add to that. So I think when you're talking about the partner programs, I think what we're seeing is that we have customers that are creating. They have a core exam, certification exam, and they're creating bespoke certifications that are for specific partners that include their core certification and then additional technologies for that partner that they're working with. So I mean, I think that's really interesting. It's just watching our clients create a certification for one business partner that they work with, and they want to certify their engineers or their sales staff or whatever it is, and it's just very specific to them. I'd like to also add that I think the other big piece of it, which we haven't really talked about, but is also just growing out of the current market that you're in. So we have a lot of our customers that are building certifications for international markets, and with the AI translation feature as an example, you can quickly take a certification and build it for your Japanese market or for whatever, or your Latin American market. So I think that you're both getting opportunities to build these custom exams that you're never able to build, or smaller certification exams or specialty exams. But on the other side, really getting the opportunity to grow your certification program, across the world, with the ability of using AI translations as well.
Fantastic. We also did have a question come in as far as, does the AI assistance go beyond design and into the exam and item analysis, which probably could be another full webinar as far as how we, you're able to use those tools. I think the short answer is yes. If we have a little time to expand on that, we will. But just moving kind of to the last piece that we had here. As we see these pieces, we had a little nod to ChatGPT at the beginning. Why is that not good enough? So we've seen that AI is adding the speed. We see the abilities that it is giving to programs. Why go with a platform that has all of these additional elements involved?
So let's say you just took your training materials and handed them over to ChatGPT and said, make me a test that I can use to certify people. The output that ChatGPT would give you is just one ingredient for what makes a certification test. So to have like a legally defensible and psychometrically valid certification test, you need evidence and structure for all of the key decisions that go into the test. So, what content goes on the test? How are the items aligned with that content? Where do you put the cut score for the test? And, if you're making multiple forms, let's say, how can you ensure that the scores on those multiple forms can be interpreted in the same way? So the shorter answer is that it's just giving you one ingredient of a test. It's not giving you anything that's legally defensible and nothing that would hold up if anyone were to challenge you on what their score means.
Yep.
And, I think I mentioned also that LLMs hallucinate. So if you're just giving it your training material and having it spit out some questions at you, it's very likely that those questions will have hallucinations. So you would need a structured review in place. You would need a lot of the same steps in the pipeline that Certiverse already includes in order to make sure that exam is or that quiz is even content valid.
I would also just kind of going back to the point around the analysis as well. And I think that's like when you're administering the exam, and there's a lot that goes into when you're presenting that item to an individual and they have to answer it, and then you take that data and then you take the statistical information across 100 test takers or 1,000 or whatever. That's something that an LLM's not going to be able to do, right? And part of our service is really to build up. We have our reporting infrastructure, a BI and a reporting infrastructure that collects all that data, does all the analysis for you, and you can run an analysis report and see how your items are doing or how your forms are performing and so forth. But that's I think that's the other part of it is like creating an item is just one piece of it. it's also making sure that it's valid. It's also building it, making it fair, making sure that the forms are fair, and making sure, like you mentioned, that it's the cut score set correctly and so forth.
Yeah, it might be useful as a way to practice, but it's not useful as a way to make a legally
And
defensible exam.
yeah, I do feel like I feel like it's also really good at, like, I think for like one-time items. Like I know that a lot of SMEs before, we've had AI, I think now since we're 2020, we've had AI for 3 years now. And a lot of, we know a lot of SMEs were creating items and then just copy and pasting those items out of ChatGPT and putting them into platforms like ours or other platforms. But yeah, creating one item you can do. It's like if you spend enough time with it, you can do it. And I know others have created 10, 20, 30, or 40 or 50 items using the prompt, but they may not be psychometrically valid, like you said.
So we are at time. I do want to thank everyone who is here, and if you are not able to continue on with us, if you would like to ask questions additionally, you can email to answers@certiverse.com. We did have a couple other questions come up in the Q&A, so if you have a moment, want to stick around and get those will also be part of the recording we can send out to you afterwards. So one of them being, is there a future state where we could API with other LLMs within the platform?
Yeah, I think I actually we took that off the roadmap literally today. We went through a bunch of tickets, and because we haven't had, at the beginning when we first built Certiverse, 3 years ago, we connected it to OpenAI, and I think it was like their 2.5 model or something like that. But I think that the models are very comparable now, and they're all very, really good. And we had a lot of very early in the in the stage of when we were introducing all the AI technologies, we had a lot of our customers asking us if they can swap out and use a different LLM and so forth. Happy to have a discussion about it, but I know that like that came up a few years ago, and today we haven't had any other requests for that. Thank you for that question. That's a good question.
And then we also were asked, the AI models are able to do all factual and recall type questions, especially grounded in documentation. But how can the platform generate realistic scenario-based questions, testing higher level thinking? So we've got a Bloom's taxonomy question in the chat.
Yeah, that's something we've thought quite a lot about. And for this initial version of our AI item generation, we're limiting it to a 4-option multiple choice test. We have baked into the prompt, to avoid simple recall questions that we want a balance of recall and understand or analyze questions. I think the ability of the AI to generate useful scenario-based questions is sort of an open question. And it's something that, as we release subsequent versions of the batch generation, we'll be testing. And I think AI also opens up the possibility for item question types that we haven't really thought that much about, sort of like interview-based questions that, uses an AI or an agent to evaluate responses in real time and make it more of like a dialogue question. I think like more complex item types are something that we'll have to test in subsequent versions. But for now, we're targeting the most common item types we have, the Certiverse.
And then we also had a standard setting question. Since you mentioned using AngOff, is the standard setting run with beta data collected as a point of comparison without it, or is there an option to do it with or without that data?
You don't need to beta test before you do a standard setting. It's good for sort of calibration and to bring into group discussion, but it's not a prerequisite. You can certainly carry out a standard setting without having pilot data or beta test data.
All right. I think that is all we had. Thank you for the vast majority of y'all who stuck around for those additional questions. I know it's a really interesting and constantly evolving topic. So happy to talk more about it. You can always reach out, and we will see you at our next session. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.